It is my hope that beyond the fear and anxieties this story will create, that you will also enjoy this journey you are about to begin.
The night was heavy with a suffocating darkness, the kind that seems to swallow up everything in its path. I found myself in a neighborhood I had never been to before, a labyrinth of winding streets and eerily silent houses. The only thing guiding me through this unfamiliar territory was the hastily scribbled address on the piece of paper clutched in my trembling hand. My new friend, Sarah, had invited me over for a sleepover at her place. She had moved to this town just a few weeks ago, and I, eager for companionship in this unfamiliar place, had eagerly accepted. But as I wandered deeper into this haunting neighborhood, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something was terribly wrong. The streetlights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that danced along the pavement. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me, and I shivered despite the warmth of my coat. The houses on either side of the road loomed like silent sentinels, their windows like blank, unseeing eyes. I quickened my pace, my footsteps echoing eerily in the stillness. The direction Sarah had given me seemed straightforward enough, but the darkness seemed to twist and distort everything. Every turn I took only seemed to lead me deeper into this bewildering maze of streets. Panic began to well up inside me, threatening to suffocate me. That's when I first saw them. Figures lurking at the edge of my vision, just beyond the reach of the feeble streetlights. They were tall and shadowy, their outlines indistinct and wavering. At first, I convinced myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I continued on my way, they seemed to draw closer, their presence growing more tangible. I tried to tell myself that it was just my fear getting the best of me, that there was nothing there. But every instinct in me screamed otherwise. I could hear soft, whispering voices, carried on the chill wind, as if the night itself was conspiring against me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I quickened my pace even more, desperate to escape this nightmare. I clutched the address in my hand, crumpling it with sweaty fingers, my only lifeline in this strange and terrifying place. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a house that matched the address Sarah had given me. It stood at the end of a long, dark driveway, its windows bathed in a dim, flickering light. I breathed a sigh of relief, my breath misting in the frigid air. As I approached the front door, I couldn't help but glance back one last time at the dark, shadowy figures that had pursued me. They seemed to have retreated, melting back into the night. But their whispered voices lingered, a haunting echo in the recesses of my mind. I knocked on the door, my knuckles rapping a nervous rhythm. The seconds stretched into minutes, and just as I was beginning to doubt whether I had the right address, the door creaked open. A warm, welcoming smile greeted me, and Sarah stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light. "Hey, you made it," she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. I was getting worried you'd get lost in this crazy neighborhood. I returned her hug, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. "I did get lost," I admitted with a nervous laugh. "This place is like a maze." Sarah led me inside, and the cozy warmth of her home enveloped me. It was a stark contrast to the cold, foreboding night outside. We spent the evening chatting and laughing, and for a while, I almost forgot about the eerie figures and the whispering voices that had haunted me. But as the night wore on, and the clock on the wall ticked away the hours, A creeping unease settled back into the pit of my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still not quite right. Sarah and I had settled down in her dimly lit living room, surrounded by flickering candles that cast eerie shadows on the walls. We were engrossed in a scary movie, our laughter echoing through the room as we tried to scare each other. But despite the lightheartedness of our evening, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that we were being watched. I glanced around the room, my eyes darting to the corners, but there was nothing there. Still, the unease lingered. As the movie reached its climax, the room seemed to grow colder, and the shadows on the walls grew darker and more menacing. The whispering voices from earlier in the night echoed in my ears, their words incomprehensible, but filled with malice. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Sarah, my voice barely above a breath. "Hear what?" she replied, her eyes fixed on the screen. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of the whispered words. They were faint, like a distant, haunting chant. It was as though the night itself had found its way into the room, carrying with it a sinister presence. "Never mind," I said, trying to dismiss my growing paranoia, but the voices persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Sarah finally turned her attention away from the movie and looked at me with concern in her eyes. "You don't look so good," she said. "Are you feeling okay?" I nodded, but the unease was gnawing at me, threatening to consume me. I couldn't take it any longer. I needed to get out of that room, away from those shadows and those whispers. "I think I need some fresh air," I mumbled, standing up abruptly. Sarah watched me go, her brow furrowed in confusion. I stepped out onto the porch, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. I took deep, calming breaths, trying to dispel the growing sense of dread that had settled over me. But as I stood there, alone in the darkness, I realized that the whispering voices were not just in my head. They were all around me, carried on the wind, as though the very night itself was conspiring to torment me. I turned to go back inside, to seek refuge in the warm light of Sarah's home, but the door was locked. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the door, calling out for Sarah to let me in. "Sarah, open the door, please." But there was no response. It was as though I had become invisible, forgotten by the world. The whispering voices grew louder, more insistent, and I could hear my name in their chilling chant. And then, as I stood there, trapped in the cold darkness, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and shadowy, its features indistinct and wavering. It reached out towards me, and I felt a cold, clammy hand close around my wrist. The door opened, and I was pulled back inside. As I turned to see Sarah, my breath quickened as I took in the peeling wallpaper, the shattered windows, and the dusty, forgotten furniture. Panic welled up inside me, threatening to consume me once more. This couldn't be real. It just couldn't. With trembling steps, I moved further into the forsaken house, my footsteps echoing through the desolate halls. Each room I entered seemed to be a twisted version of the one before, as though I had stepped into a nightmarish funhouse with no escape. As I explored, the sense of dread that had gripped me earlier only intensified. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the air grew colder and more oppressive with every passing moment. I could still hear the faint, haunting whispers that had plagued me throughout the night, their sinister voices seeming to come from the very walls themselves. The figures, too, continued to torment me. They lurked in the shadows, just out of reach, their indistinct forms shifting and wavering. They seemed to delight in my fear, their presence a constant reminder of the nightmarish reality I found myself trapped in. I called out for help, my voice trembling and desperate. But there was no one to answer my pleas. The house remained an empty, echoing chamber of horrors, and I was its unwilling inhabitant. I stumbled upon a staircase that led me deeper into the bowels of the house, and I descended with trepidation. The steps creaked underfoot, their eerie groans adding to the suffocating atmosphere of the place. At the bottom of the staircase, I entered a room that froze me in my tracks. It was a grotesque parody of a bedroom, with a rotting, moth-eaten canopy bed at its center. But what drew my gaze was the figure that lay atop the bed. It was Sarah, or what was left of her. She was a specter, a ghostly figure with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. Her skeletal hand reached out, as if beckoning me closer, and a haunting, mournful moan escaped her lips. I stumbled back in horror, unable to tear my gaze away from this ghastly apparition. This couldn't be real. It had to be another nightmare, another cruel twist in this waking hell I had been thrust into.
Well, that was a bit to take in. If you would like to hear more of this tale and the creation of others like it, please subscribe to Tension Tales. Be sure to also like this video as well as select the bell icon so YouTube will let you know when the story has continued. Now it's time to let your heart rate rest. We will see you soon.